Let's turn our attention now to an individual who has carved a way forward not only for himself, but for one of the most complex systems that's meant to protect those who are facing extreme vulnerabilities. His name is Sixto Cancel, founder and CEO of Think of Us, a research and design lab driving systematic change in child welfare. Also, a beloved grantee of the Hilton Foundation. Sixto was named as a Forbes Top 30 Under 30 social entrepreneur and is on the 2021 Forbes Under 30 Lister board. He's been recognized by the White House as a White House champion of change. He's a Clinton Global Initiative University alum, a Fast Forward alum, and a Ashoka Fellow, and many, 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 many other accolades. Sixto and the team at Think of Us are working to ensure that every person has the conditions that they need to heal and develop and thrive. So please join me in welcoming to our stage Sixto Cancel.
All righty, good morning, folks. Ooh, that was weak. Good morning, folks. There we go. I'm gonna go off script a little bit, but I promise I won't go too far. Last night we had an amazing dinner where there were folks from the foundation, there were prize winner, there was our prize winner, so congratulations. That's where we clap. Ooh, we're gonna have a hard time today. But I wanted just to share something because I was deeply moved by last night. There are three things that I want to just say real quickly. Number one was I wasn't in charge of the invitations. Number two is it was one of the most beautiful dinners because we actually got to connect. And in that connection, I realized there wasn't a long program, so more is less, or less is more, less is more. But the important part that I realized there was this theme of a small group of people, and when I kept hearing this, something really touched me last night, which is we talked about ancestors and being on the foundation, as ancestors as our foundation to do our work and the calling that we have to do this work. But there was something else. As I watched that video of all of these impactful leaders, walking legends, it was like a transfer of actual energy. And so these small groups of people have always been the thing that led to global change. And to see last night from the Amazon to every single part of the world that these impact leaders have done, I was deeply moved. And now I know that we not only sit on our ancestors' foundation, but we are standing side by side with people who believe in humanity. And so I just wanted to share that with you, and I'm sorry for those of you who didn't get an invitation. So as we were at dinner, I also got to share a little bit about myself. I grew up in foster care, and so people all the time ask me, what is the hardest part about growing up in the foster care system? I was an 11-month baby when I was placed in the foster care system. By the time I was 9, I was adopted. I was given this new forever family, but it was far from a loving home. I was consistently referred to as the N-word. The refrigerators couldn't be touched. While the white children got to go to a private school, I was sent to a public school. That woman cared more about the check than she did me. By the time I was 13, I found myself couch surfing. When I tried to tell the system what was happening to me, they didn't believe me. And after 2 years of couch surfing, I knew that I had to take matters into my own hands. So it was like, after watching Law and Order, that I realized I needed evidence of what was happening. Detective Stabler or Olivia Benson. However you get your evidence, the point was, I went ahead and made sure that I got that evidence. And what it took for me was to literally tape a recorder to my chest. But by the time I got what I needed, I was able to get back into foster care. Even without abuse, foster care is a very tough experience. You don't know what is actually going to happen to you. You're placed with a stranger, and you're expected to become family. But if you don't fit in or you act up a little bit too much, you will find yourself in a new home, a new school, new everything. When I was placed back in foster care, I was 15. I thought it was the end of the storm, but it was just the beginning of the next storm. I didn't go back home. I didn't get adopted. I ended up aging out, becoming too old to stay in the system. But unlike many others, I was placed in a nonprofit program where I got to learn how is it that I was going to live life after high school on my own. Even with that support, let me be clear, the foster care system is not doing a good job of raising children. Unsupported foster youth are 2 to 3 times more likely to have negative outcomes related to homelessness, incarceration, and being sexually trafficked. The mental toll is severe. I want you to think about our veterans who served in Iraq. Foster youth are 2 times more likely than war veterans to experience and suffer from PTSD. It is clear that the foster care system is broken. It is designed wrong, and it needs to be redesigned by the people who are impacted, people with lived experience. This is why I started to think of us. We approach problem solving differently. We actually engage people who are impacted. We ask them questions, and we listen. We take the collective experience of thousands of people who are impacted and turn those into data and insights that show us where are the leverage points to change the system. Where is it that we can start to design? We work with leaders across the entire sector and people with lived experience to be able to co-design new solutions. And then we're gonna go ahead and figure out how to get it done. I wanna give you an example. We heard overwhelmingly from foster youth that they were unnecessarily being placed in group homes. The system was acting like these young people had nowhere to go. So we sent our researchers out. And what they were able to reveal was that the majority of children actually had extended family members that they could have lived with. On top of that, they were having these very traumatic experiences. We collected those voices, and we wrote a report. The truth of what they shared with us was so strong that it informed litigation against the states brought on by the United States Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division. Our report was a part of an amicus brief that went to the United States Supreme Court. Within days of our report being released, 6 states committed to eliminating the unnecessary placement of young people in group homes. But that wasn't it. This report fueled the United States Senate to launch an investigation into the 4 largest group home companies. After a 2-year investigation, where that committee reviewed over 25,000 documents, did surprise visits to institutions across the country, and really heard from people with lived experience, the Senate found that the group home industry is filled with abuse, neglect, and that it is being funded by taxpayers. One of the 4 major companies investigated systematically enabled sexual abuse, with their institution seeing over 40 instances of rape in just 25 years. Many of these facilities intentionally isolated children from their families, often requiring them to earn points to be able to make a phone call home or have a weekend visit with family. They found the use of chemical sedation to control children. We've seen tragic things. Cornelius Frederick, a 16-year-old boy who was in a facility through a sandwich, and he was restrained by staff. And for 12 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, 12, until he could no longer whisper, "I can't breathe." He lost his life, and he's not the only young person in the recent years to have lost his life. And what the Senate report investigation found is that they also found that these group home companies has also engaged in corruption, falsifying records, covering up injuries, and all while receiving billions in taxpayer funding. One company alone made $2.4 billion in Medicaid revenue in 2023. That is 16 times the federal budget for all services that the feds actually fund at the state level for youth who are aging out of foster care. The Senate chairman committed that he will lead the charge to make sure that we end taxpayer-funded abuse. All of this stuff has happened in less than 3.5 years. That is the power of lived experience. For the past 9 years here at Think of Us, we've also listened to thousands of young people. And it's become so clear that the way forward is to transform who children get to live with. We believe that kin can transform the foster care system. Foster care is a different type. Kinship care is a very different type of foster care that is rooted in extended family and chosen family identified by the child. When a child needs to be kept safe and cannot live at home, kinship care is the state enabling that child to live with an extended family member or an adult that child has already known, an adult who loves that child beyond a contractual agreement. And what we now know is that research is clear that when children are placed with kin, they fare way better, from mental health to graduating high school on time, and yet only 35% of young people in the foster care system are actually placed with kin. But it doesn't have to be this way. For example, in one state, our senior fellow partnered with local systems to require additional approvals, such as a social worker has to get an approval if you're gonna place in a traditional foster home. They unblock social media to help find family members. They asked young people who could you live with. The difference was incredible. Children were more stable, stayed in the same schools, connected to their community, and that kind of success can and should be replicated across the country. In another state, we looked at some counties, and we found that over 80% of the children who were in foster care were actually living with kin. So the idea that young people don't have a dose is just not true. And here's what this shows. When a system believes that children should actually live in families, guess what? Children actually are raised in families. And there is enough resources to make it possible. This system spends over $30 billion on less than 1 million families a year. There's more than enough to make sure that we find families, support them, and that every child who needs to be in foster care is living with a loving extended family member. We, in coalition with eight other organizations, we helped pass some regulations that made it easy for extended family members to step up. And it transferred $3 billion from traditional foster care to kinship care. But what does this mean? When I was 14, I met my brother for the first time, and I have always been a foster kid all my life. And he made a promise to me that he would get me out of the system, that he would save money and get an apartment. And yet, what happened was, unfortunately, he worked very hard to try to get an apartment, but the rules, the regulations, were that we needed to have a certain number of square feet per room. He couldn't save enough for the deposit. He had to be licensed as a foster parent to even take me in. So he went back to the projects of Puerto Rico and needed to move back with his grandfather to save money. But yet, unfortunately, gun violence took his life. And so I would have traded in a living room for me to be able to live with my brother. It's not enough just to have the money. We need the actual system that works for it. So we need to do more than just give kinship care parents what we give foster parents. We need to be able to go ahead and find innovative interventions that actually meet us where we're at. Family is possible. And for me, I was almost 30 years old when my sister called me while I was visiting New York City. She told me that in just 3 hours that my father's side of the family was going to be having a family reunion. I didn't know that they existed, and they didn't know that I existed. And so I raced over to Harlem, walking through that park, looking at every single family, wondering which one of those was mine. And when I finally arrived, words cannot describe this moment. They were kind. They were accepting. And just most importantly, they were curious about who I was. And about 90 minutes in, everything changed. I discovered that I had 4 aunts and uncles who had been fostering longer than I had been alive. And in that moment, all I can do was take out my phone and Google Maps to my last foster home, 58 miles away. My whole life, I was always 58 miles away from people who could have loved me. I'll end by saying this. We are creating a new way forward, one that prioritizes kinship care, ensuring that every single child is actually being raised in a loving home. What I believe and what I imagine is that no matter if that child exits that school bus and their history is one where they've experienced physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, I believe that that child can come off that school bus and run through the door and actually be with people that they love and that they actually know what it means to say, I'm truly coming home. Thank you.